Step out of the car. Man, move over here.
Why are you
Hands
doing
up,
this?
please.
Let me ask you this.
Over here. Hands up, please.
Why?
What did you do to that girl?
If anyone's up there, come down with your hands up now. Why don't you explain what's going on?
He's looking at some serious problems.
What's going on? Okay, 4.
My daughter.
Okay. How old's your daughter?
She's
Okay. So,
My attorney present. Nobody else sitting here. I gotta just say.
okay. So, what makes her missing?
We can't find her. We got a call yesterday saying
Literally. I can't get it. We're having these shots fired inside of the house.
The first sign that something was terribly wrong wasn't a body, a weapon, or a crime scene. It was a frightened mother walking into a police station, desperate to report that her 18-year-old daughter had vanished.
Okay, 4.
my daughter.
Okay. How old's your daughter?
She's 18.
Okay. So, what makes her missing?
We can't find her. We got a call yesterday.
Just
saying
one day
she-
earlier, Samantha Guthrie had left home, and then an anonymous phone call delivered a horrifying claim. The caller said Samantha had been shot in the head, stuffed into the trunk of a car, and driven away. Police had already checked the address mentioned in the call and found nothing. No blood, no signs of violence, nothing to suggest a young woman had been attacked. At first, the report sounded almost impossible to verify. But within days, detectives would uncover blood hidden inside an abandoned house, hear first-hand accounts from multiple witnesses, and begin unraveling
If anyone's up there, come down with your hands up now.
I think there's blood on
a case that connected several people to one address on Lillian Street. What started as a missing person investigation would soon become one of the most disturbing homicide cases the city had seen. Everything began in November 2018 when Samantha's mother, Joanie, contacted police after realizing nobody had seen or heard from her daughter in more than a day. When officers arrived, she explained her fear. The day before, someone had called the family, claiming Samantha had been shot in the head, Samantha had left home and started spending time with a different crowd, often seen at abandoned houses known as gathering spots for people involved in drugs and crime. She had grown increasingly distant from her family. Police told Joanie they'd already searched the Lillian Street house. It was vacant and scheduled to be boarded up, and officers found no blood and nothing supporting the anonymous caller's story. One officer even suggested it might have been a cruel prank, in a car trunk and taken away. Officers had already gone to that address and searched it, but found nothing. The address was on Lillian Street, a name that meant nothing to the responding officer at the time, but would soon become the center of an investigation involving multiple witnesses, several suspects, and an abandoned house detectives would return to again and again. Joanie explained that after turning 18, but before the interview ended, Joanie gave detectives 2 critical details: a description of Samantha, including a distinctive butterfly tattoo on her right arm, and the name of the person she believed Samantha had last been with, Danny Hamby. At that point, the name meant little to investigators. There was no confirmed crime scene, no physical evidence, and no verified witness to explain what had happened. Police published Samantha's missing person information and kept searching for leads. The next morning, everything changed. A man named John Marshall came forward, claiming he'd been inside the Lillian Street house the night Samantha disappeared, and if his account was true, he had witnessed nearly everything. Marshall said Samantha had spent hours trying to find a ride there, eventually arriving in an Uber he believed her father had paid for.
You're safe now, okay? Why don't you explain what's going on?
Detectives later confirmed her father had indeed paid for an Uber that night to that exact address, matching Marshall's story. He said he'd walked to a nearby store and on the way saw Samantha and a man he knew as Yoshi heading toward the house.
What was he wearing?
About half an hour later, Danny Hamby arrived with a woman named Tony and another man, Marshall, later identified as William. Marshall let them in the back door. Danny and Tony went upstairs, while William stayed down. He named several other people who'd been inside that night, giving detectives their first real list of witnesses and possible suspects. Marshall described hearing music upstairs and no yelling until Samantha came down looking distressed. The house was no longer just an address from an anonymous call. Physical evidence now backed up key parts of Marshall's account. Danny Hamby and Tony became wanted in connection with the killing, while detectives worked to locate everyone else Marshall had named. The next break came quickly. Police responded to a report of a frightened young woman running into a stranger's home.
What are you doing with your foot, man?
I got
Blisters?
blisters and fucking, it's called, jump.
Claiming people had chased her with a gun. She identified herself as Kimberly, a name Marshall had already given as someone present the night Samantha was shot. Kimberly, clearly shaken, described being chased and said she'd come to the area to visit a friend on, of all streets, Lillian. She said she didn't know anyone else nearby. To detectives, the timing was alarming. Down turned up a knife and a bag of needles, and one of them admitted to having a loaded handgun, which officers recovered safely. The arrest was straightforward. The interviews that followed were not. Danny, believing he'd only been picked up for the gun, was read his rights and immediately asked for an attorney, refusing to answer anything no matter how detectives approached it. Investigators then turned to Tony, treating her less as a suspect and more as someone who might still help. They explained a young woman was missing and that they had strong reason to believe Danny was involved. Tony insisted. Days after the shooting, another person tied to the same house was reporting an armed chase, raising real fears that witnesses could be in danger. The search intensified. Then came another urgent call. A man reported that Danny and Tony had pulled a gun on him and were now sitting in a nearby vehicle, bragging about killing someone days earlier. Police moved fast, surrounded the car, and ordered both occupants out at gunpoint. He wasn't capable of that, and denied ever seeing Samantha. Detectives pressed harder, warning that if she kept insisting she'd been with Danny the whole time, she risked being tied to whatever they ultimately proved happened. She held her ground. They appealed to her as a mother of 2 sons, asking what she'd do if one of them vanished. She said she'd do everything possible to find them, and detectives reminded her Samantha's family deserved the same chance. Everything Dylan described lined up with Marshall's account and the physical evidence. Outside the house, detectives found a fire pit with recently burned material. Inside, sections of carpet and drywall were missing exactly where Dylan said Samantha had fallen. The pieces were finally coming together, but one question remained. Where was Samantha? Investigators turned to William next, since Dylan said he'd been in the vehicle after Samantha was taken from the house. Detectives appealed to him directly. Her family deserved to know where she was. William agreed to cooperate. He said he'd been told to lie down in the back so no one outside could see him, meaning he couldn't watch the route, and admitted he'd feared something might happen to him too. He couldn't give an exact location, but remembered the drive wasn't long, that the surroundings turned rural with large trees in bright fall colors, and that the vehicle turned onto a 2-lane road before stopping near a fenced area. It wasn't a perfect description, but after days of chasing leads, it was enough to start a new search. Officers focused on areas outside Akron, matching Williams' description, and days later, a location fit everything he'd said. A patrol unit was sent out, and before long, officers found Samantha Guthrie's body, left in the open, unburied. One detail confirmed it immediately: the butterfly tattoo on her right arm, the same one her mother had described the day she filed the missing person report. That small detail, given in fear at the very start of the case, was what finally brought Samantha home. With Samantha found, attention turned fully to accountability. Witness interviews, physical evidence, and multiple interrogations pointed to Danny as the man who shot Samantha inside the Lillian Street house, with Tony found to have played a significant role afterward. William, despite cooperating, was found to have been more involved than he first admitted and was convicted of abuse of a corpse and tampering with evidence, receiving 10 years in prison. Tony was sentenced to 16 years for tampering with evidence and obstruction of justice. Danny Hamby, charged with murder and abuse of a corpse, received a life sentence with the possibility of parole after 24 years. Began with an anonymous phone call and a mother's desperate missing person report, ended only after detectives pieced together dozens of witness statements, returned to a crime scene they'd already searched once, uncovered blood that had nearly gone unnoticed, and followed every lead connected to an abandoned house on Lillian Street. For Samantha Guthrie's family, nothing could undo what happened. But after days of unbearable uncertainty, they finally had answers. The daughter they searched for was found, and the people responsible were brought before the court.